Have you ever wondered what it would be like to stand on the deck of the USS Missouri, the battleship where Japan surrendered to the Allies, ending World War II? Before moving forward, I will suggest you guys to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It motivates us to make more quality content. So let's get started. The USS Missouri is a battleship that served in the United States Navy during World War II and the Korean War. It was on the deck of the USS Missouri that Japan surrendered to the Allies on September 2, 1945, effectively ending World War II. The USS Missouri is now a museum ship in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The USS Missouri was the third and last of the Iowa-class battleships to be commissioned. It was built at the New York Naval Shipyard and launched on January 29, 1944. The USS Missouri was commissioned into service on June 11, 1944. The USS Missouri arrived in the Pacific Theater in January 1945. It participated in the invasion of Iwo Jima and the Battle of Okinawa. The USS Missouri also bombarded Japanese mainland cities in preparation for an invasion that never happened. On September 2, 1945, the Japanese surrendered to the Allies on the deck of the USS Missouri. The surrender ceremony marked the end of World War II. After World War II, the USS Missouri was decommissioned in February 1949. It was recommissioned in June 1951 to serve in the Korean War. The USS Missouri participated in the bombardment of Korean coastal targets. The USS Missouri was decommissioned again in February 1955. It was recommissioned for a third time in January 1986. The USS Missouri participated in Operation Desert Storm in 1991. The USS Missouri was decommissioned for a fourth and final time in March 1992. It was donated to the USS Missouri Memorial Association and opened as a museum ship in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, in January 1999. The USS Missouri is one of the most famous battleships in history. It is a symbol of American naval power and military might. The USS Missouri is also a reminder of the sacrifices that were made by American servicemen and women during World War II and the Korean War. Interesting facts about the USS Missouri. The USS Missouri is the largest battleship ever built. The USS Missouri is the only battleship to have hosted the surrender of a major power. The USS Missouri is the only battleship to have fired its guns in 3 wars: World War II, the Korean War, and the Gulf War. The USS Missouri is the only battleship to have been decommissioned 4 times and recommissioned 3 times. The USS Missouri is now a museum ship in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and is visited by millions of people each year. The USS Missouri and the end of World War II. The USS Missouri played a significant role in the end of World War II. On September 2, 1945, Japan surrendered to the Allies on the deck of the USS Missouri. The surrender ceremony marked the end of the deadliest war in human history. The surrender ceremony was a simple affair. Representatives of the Japanese government and military boarded the USS Missouri and signed the surrender documents. The ceremony was witnessed by a large crowd of American sailors, soldiers, and airmen. The surrender of Japan was a momentous occasion. It marked the end of a long and bloody war. It also ushered in a new era of peace and prosperity for the world. The USS Missouri is a symbol of the end of World War II and the beginning of a new era. It is a reminder of the sacrifices that were made to achieve peace and freedom. The Thresher disaster. The Thresher disaster was a fatal submarine incident that occurred on April 10, 1963, in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. The United States Navy nuclear submarine USS Thresher sank during deep diving tests, killing all 129 crew members on board. What happened? On April 10, 1963, the USS Thresher departed Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in Kittery, Maine, for deep diving tests in the Atlantic Ocean. The Thresher was a new type of submarine, and the tests were designed to push the submarine to its limits. The Thresher began its dive at 7:45 a.m. and reached a depth of 350 feet by 9:15 a.m. At this point, the submarine experienced a seawater leak in the engine room. The leak caused a power failure, which in turn caused the submarine to lose depth control. The Thresher began to sink rapidly. The crew attempted to counter the sinking by blowing the ballast tanks, but it was too late. The Thresher sank to the bottom of the ocean, killing everyone on board. What went wrong? The Thresher disaster was the result of a combination of factors. One factor was a design flaw in the submarine's seawater piping system. The piping system was not designed to withstand the high pressures of deep diving. Another factor was a lack of training and experience among the Thresher's crew. The Thresher was a new type of submarine, and the crew was not fully trained on how to operate it. Finally, the Thresher disaster was the result of a series of human errors. The crew did not respond to the seawater leak quickly enough, and they made several mistakes while trying to control the sinking submarine. Aftermath of the Thresher disaster. The Thresher disaster was a major setback for the U.S. Navy. It was the first loss of a nuclear submarine, and it raised serious concerns about the safety of submarine operations. The Navy responded to the Thresher disaster by implementing a number of safety reforms. These reforms included new training programs for submarine crews and new design standards for submarine equipment. The Thresher disaster also led to the development of a new type of submarine safety rescue vehicle called the Deep Submergence Rescue Vehicle. The DSRV is a small submarine that can be used to rescue submariners from sunken submarines. The Thresher disaster was a tragic event that cost the lives of 129 brave sailors. It was also a reminder of the dangers of submarine operations. The Navy has learned from the Thresher disaster, and it has taken steps to make submarine operations safer. Lessons learned from the Thresher disaster. The Thresher disaster taught the Navy a number of important lessons about submarine safety. One lesson is that submarine design must take into account the high pressures of deep diving. Another lesson is that submarine crews must be properly trained on how to operate their submarines. Finally, the Thresher disaster taught the Navy the importance of having a reliable submarine safety rescue vehicle. The Thresher disaster was a tragedy, but it also led to important safety reforms. The Navy is now safer than ever before, thanks in part to the lessons learned from the Thresher disaster. The Thresher disaster was a major turning point in the history of submarine safety. The Navy learned a number of important lessons from the disaster, and it implemented a number of safety reforms as a result. The Kursk disaster. The Kursk disaster was a fatal submarine incident that occurred on August 12, 2000, in the Barents Sea during a Russian naval exercise. The Russian nuclear submarine Kursk sank with 118 crew members on board, killing all but 23 of them. What happened? On August 12, 2000, the Kursk was participating in a naval exercise in the Barents Sea. The submarine was carrying 2 practice torpedoes, one of which contained a hydrogen peroxide-powered engine. At 11:28 a.m., an explosion occurred in the Kursk's torpedo compartment. The explosion was caused by a leak of hydrogen peroxide from the engine of one of the practice torpedoes. The leak ignited, causing a chain reaction that damaged the Kursk's nuclear reactor. The Kursk sank to the bottom of the ocean, killing all but 23 of the crew members on board. What went wrong? The Kursk disaster was the result of a combination of factors. One factor was a design flaw in the Kursk's torpedo compartment. The torpedo compartment was not designed to withstand the force of an explosion. Another factor was a lack of training and experience among the Kursk's crew. The Kursk's crew was not fully trained on how to deal with an emergency like an explosion in the torpedo compartment. Finally, the Kursk disaster was the result of a series of human errors. The Kursk's crew made several mistakes while trying to respond to the explosion and other emergencies. Aftermath of the Kursk disaster. The Kursk disaster was a major setback for the Russian Navy. It was the first loss of a nuclear submarine since the Thresher disaster in 1963. The disaster also raised serious concerns about the safety of Russian submarines. The Russian Navy responded to the Kursk disaster by implementing a number of safety reforms. These reforms included new training programs for submarine crews and new design standards for submarine equipment. The Kursk disaster also led to the development of a new type of submarine safety rescue vehicle called the Advanced Deep Sea Rescue Vehicle. The ASV is a small submarine that can be used to rescue submariners from sunken submarines. Lessons learned from the Kursk disaster. The Kursk disaster taught the Russian Navy a number of important lessons about submarine safety. One lesson is that submarine design must take into account the hazards of explosions. Another lesson is that submarine crews must be properly trained on how to deal with emergencies. Finally, the Kursk disaster taught the Russian Navy the importance of having a reliable submarine safety rescue vehicle. The Kursk disaster was a tragedy, but it also led to important safety reforms. The Russian Navy is now safer than ever before, thanks in part to the lessons learned from the Kursk disaster.